But I knew he wasn't getting better.
I was afraid to go back to sleep.
What could possibly be wrong with him?
Did you not hear me? Are you trying to kill me?
My whole world just crashed.
Next, 3 medical mysteries that defied the experts. The Salems thought their son had a bad sinus infection until he wound up in the hospital, fighting for his life.
It was our son that we had lived with for 2 years, and all of a sudden, we might not have him for a third.
Charmian was a size 2 Southern California beauty until her body began to undergo a terrifying metamorphosis.
It's very humiliating to have to be in maternity clothes when you had been a size 2.
And Harley Howard's doctors thought he had a heart problem. They never imagined what was really going on.
And I told my wife, I am just resolved to die because there's nothing I can do.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. In the spring of 1993, Jane and Ed Salem bring their second son, Alex, home from the hospital.
The first few months with Alex at home was what I thought very typical.
He was very similar to Michael, our other child, and he was pretty much a normal kid to us.
At first, Alex seems fine, but soon Ed and Jane notice he's getting a lot of sinus infections.
When Alex had the sinus infections, he was very lethargic, kind of slunky almost. He just kind of laid there.
He would look droopy, his eyes were droopy, and then he would have a funny sort of breathing that was just kind of a noisy breathing.
As the months pass, Alex's sinus infections and strange breathing become more frequent.
I would say every couple of months we were back at the pediatrician with the breathing.
The pediatrician puts Alex on a long-term, low-dose antibiotic to fight his infections, and he seems to respond well.
It did keep the sinus infections fewer and farther between, but it never eliminated them.
By 18 months, Michael, Alex's older brother, had been walking. But Alex is now the same age, and he isn't. Jane starts to get worried.
I did express the concerns that I had to the pediatrician, and his concern was that perhaps his ligaments weren't as tight as they should be, but it wasn't something that was unusual, and that by the time he was a teenager, he would be more in the normal range of things.
At the time, I was starting to get slightly concerned, but I was taking the doctor's word that, he will grow.
Less than 2 months after the visit, Alex starts walking. The Salems breathe a sigh of relief until they notice how he's walking.
He just wasn't as sturdy of a child. His legs and arms and stuff didn't give him as much security.
He was working to stay balanced, working to not fall. Alex never developed that ability to feel stable, and he was very clunky, almost like a Frankenstein walk.
Then, shortly before his second birthday, Alex develops an ear infection that knocks him literally off his feet.
He could hardly stand up. He'd stand up and fall over. I mean, he was like a noodle. That's when the pediatrician said to me that based on the fact that we had these walking issues, coupled with an ear infection that's gotten him off balance, he wanted us to go to a neurologist.
Scared of what the balance problems might mean, Jane and Ed take Alex to see a neurologist.
He looked at him, bent him around, felt his joints. He said, yeah, he is pretty loose.
But as he continues with the examination, he discovers something bizarre.
When he took the little reflex hammer and knocked on his knees and his elbows, he got no reflexes from Alex at all.
The neurologist performs a test called an electromyogram to see if the electrical impulses in Alex's muscles are working properly by stimulating them with a low electrical current.
He had electrodes or something hooked up to him. It was electric shocks, little zaps into his skin. And I remember just having a box of Kleenex next to me and just wiping tears away. It was heart-wrenching.
The results of the EMG are perplexing. 2-year-old Alex has peripheral nerve damage in his arms and legs. Like static on a telephone line, Peripheral nerve damage distorts and in some cases interrupts communication between the brain and the rest of the body. It could be an indication of injury, infection, or worse. The neurologist immediately orders an MRI of Alex's brain.
I was most fearful that there was something wrong with his brain, a tumor, some kind of brain surgery that would have to happen.
To everyone's relief, the MRI comes back clean. Alex's brain looks completely normal. But an otherwise healthy 2-year-old shouldn't have peripheral nerve damage.
There had to be some underlying cause that he wanted to uncover.
The neurologist sends Alex home and arranges for more testing. But before any more tests can be done, Alex develops another sinus infection, the worst one yet.
Alex was put on an antibiotic. He was acting very sick, just kind of lethargic.
His breathing was very bad. He looked very sickly. He had no energy.
But this time around, the antibiotics are not helping. Within a day, Alex can barely move, and his breathing is labored.
His breathing was horrible. I was really, really frightened. I felt like he could stop breathing any moment.
Ed and Jane rush Alex to the ER.
I was holding Alex. I was trying to calm him. I wanted to be able to hold him tight, calm him, give him CPR if I needed to.
He clearly didn't have much energy. He was sleeping and difficult to arouse. When you did tests on him, for instance, to check the reflexes, his legs didn't move. We noted he was breathing quickly.
Alex is hooked up to a glucose drip, and blood tests are ordered. When the tests come back, they reveal Alex's lactic acid levels are much too high. Lactic acid is an alternate energy source created by the metabolism in times of extreme exertion. Athletes experience high levels after competition, and it's the chemical that makes muscles ache after exercise. The body can run on lactic acid for short intervals, but over an extended period of time, the lack of a proper energy source can be disastrous to the brain.
We don't know why he has the excess acid in his body. The longer that excess acid is there, the more concerned we are that it's going to lead to damage. Basically, from the time he came in, we're racing against time.
Two-year-old Alex Salem is fighting for his life. He came into the ER just a few hours ago with what seemed like a bad sinus infection. But now doctors have discovered that the lactic acid in his body is at toxic levels, and they need to figure out why fast.
He was breathing deep, deep and short.
Things were getting really bad for Alex. If his body keeps building up this lactic acid, this is not going to be good for the brain.
One possible cause for Alex's high lactic acid is lack of oxygen.
And if oxygen doesn't go to your tissue, the tissue says, I need more energy, and the way it makes more energy is it takes sugar and converts it into lactic acid.
Alex is transferred to the pediatric intensive care unit. He is intubated and hooked up to a respirator so the doctors can regulate his oxygen intake.
We had many different doctors that came in, lung specialists, kidney specialists, eye doctors, heart people.
We had all kinds of tubes in him, and we were just praying that he would be ours forever.
If the high lactic acid is being caused by a shortage of oxygen, 24 hours on the respirator should solve it. But when the doctors check him the next day, they see that Alex's lactic acid is still climbing.
And I said, this doesn't make sense. There have to be other explanations. Is it possible that he has some sort of an internal problem in his body?
Dr. Wisnitzer begins to wonder if Alex's metabolism could be malfunctioning.
When we're processing sugar correctly, there's a whole little small factory that helps break down sugar into elemental parts. There's different workers within that factory. And if the worker didn't show up, the assembly line falls apart.
Dr. Wisnitzer consults with Dr. Douglas Kerr, a specialist in metabolic diseases, to determine whether all of these workers, or enzymes, are present in Alex's body.
Well, there are two tests that were done in our laboratory. One was measuring lactic acid, and secondly was measuring the specific enzyme, Pyruvate Dehydrogenase complex, or PDC.
If, as Dr. Kerr suspects, Alex is missing the PDC enzyme, then he will be having trouble metabolizing the glucose in his IV drip. If he can't break down sugar into energy, his body will make lactic acid instead. Dr. Wisnitzer replaces Alex's sugar IV with one that is protein-based.
He was given a formula that was basically carbohydrate-free to basically see how his body could use alternate sources of energy.
And then everyone, doctors and parents, wait.
I remember a sense of, this is an endless wait. I feel like we were kind of in limbo. He was in such a delicate state.
Finally, the results of Dr. Kerr's tests are back. Their suspicions were correct. Alex's PDC level is extremely low.
So in deficiency of this enzyme, lactic acid accumulates in the blood, so that impairs particularly the nervous system.
And when doctors check Alex's lactic acid levels hours after going on the carbohydrate-free drip, they see that they have dropped dramatically.
The only reason excess acid was building up was because you were giving him sugar. You stop giving him sugar, you don't build up excess acid.
Dr. Kerr and Dr. Wisnitzer are now confident that they know exactly what's been causing all of Alex's problems.
So we went into a room with, it was kind of a conference room with about 10 to 12, 15 doctors. I couldn't tell you how many.
I started to take notes when we first started speaking with them, and then I stopped because I couldn't keep up.
Alex has a rare genetic disorder called Pyruvate dehydrogenase complex deficiency. Alex's PDC enzyme is inactive. Without this enzyme, his body cannot break down carbohydrates correctly. Instead of turning carbs into energy through the normal process, he gets energy by converting sugar into lactic acid, an inefficient and less powerful energy source. Eventually, the buildup of lactic acid will suffocate brain cells and cause brain damage.
We felt like we were just being shot, one shot after another of what could possibly be wrong with him.
It was our son that we had, lived with for 2 years, and all of a sudden, we might not have him for a third.
Alex Salem has just been diagnosed with a rare enzyme deficiency that makes his body unable to process sugar and carbohydrates correctly. It is this metabolic disorder, called PDC deficiency, that has been causing his strange symptoms all along.
The nerve damage from the PDC deficiency was making his muscles a bit weaker, and because the muscles were a bit weaker, it made his joints a bit looser.
Just like Alex's lethargy and wobbliness was caused by his enzyme deficiency, so was his heavy breathing during the sinus infections.
The sinus infection was just a trigger. It basically upset the precarious balance in his body of how energy was being utilized and shifted it over to a situation where he built up a lot of excess lactic acid. And if there's too much acid in your blood, you breathe quickly in order to try to lessen the effects of that acid.
The doctors tell the Salems that there isn't much known about treating this extremely rare disease. Only a few hundred cases have been reported worldwide. But they do know that it has no cure.
They did not give us a prognosis because the children that are affected with this disease really don't live as long in general as Alex had already.
I remember us both crying and just holding each other and crying.
But Dr. Kerr is one of the foremost specialists in the field, and he comes up with a novel treatment plan for Alex. He puts the 2-year-old on a complete ketogenic diet.
Ketogenic diet is a special diet that limits the amount of carbohydrate or sugar that you take in on a daily basis and increases the amount of fat that you get, because you can make energy from protein, you can make energy from fats.
Alex is put on a carbohydrate-free soy-based formula, supplemented with oils for extra fat.
It's very similar to a baby formula, like you would, feed a baby out of a bottle. It has all of the nutrients and the calories.
After less than a week of being on his new diet, Alex goes home.
He gained strength quickly. He was much healthier, hardly got colds at all.
He was starting to look better and he had a little bit of life in his eyes.
Alex spends the next 10 years on Dr. Kerr's ketogenic formula. Now 13, the carb-free diet has done wonders for him.
He still struggles when he's congested with losing his speech for short periods of time, or we call it getting wobbly. But in looking at where he could be with this disease, he's doing very well.
However, the peripheral nerve damage Alex suffered during his first 2 years of life is permanent.
He has some mild motor problems in terms of when you watch him walk, it's not 100% normal, but functionally it is. That means that he can basically go do things that he wants to do on a day-to-day basis, and that's what I care about. He's able to act like a child.
I play basically every sport in our backyard that's possible, and I just love playing sports.
If Alex were to stray from the diet, the effects would be devastating.
I would think the consequences would be most likely affecting his nervous system and possibly something affecting the brain directly, which could be seizures or further brain degeneration.
But for such a deadly disorder, the Salems had to wonder why it couldn't be diagnosed earlier.
Alex initially presents with basically a peripheral nerve problem. When x-rays were done of his brain looked perfectly normal. It's only when he had that sudden deterioration and then he showed up the excess acid in the blood that was present that basically opens people's eyes to say there was something more going on than that.
Alex is pretty much writing the book as to what is potentially possible for people with this disease or on a long-term ketogenic diet.
Many times people will ask us, how do you do that? How do you have a child on this special diet? How do you manage living with this every day? Isn't that difficult to cook differently? Look at his face. As his parent, my choice is to say this is too hard or this is difficult. I would walk on hot coals. It's not hard. It's for Alex.
Doctors knew that Alex Salem was sick, even if they didn't know why. But Charmian Mcgraw spent years trying to convince physicians that she was suffering from something more serious than overeating.
I was just a very healthy person, so I just really enjoyed that kind of lifestyle where I had fun.
Charmian's a very attractive young woman, very long blonde hair, very athletic, busy all the time.
But one day in 1993, the 31-year-old Southern California native notices a change in herself.
Out of the blue, I realized I was putting on some weight. I had gone up about 15 pounds or so within a very short period of time, less than 3 weeks.
And she's small in stature, so it was quite a lot of weight for her.
I lived in an area that was very much into looks. Like I say, anorexia is a compliment where I live, not a disease.
Charmian, used to being a size 2 all her life, is worried, so she goes to see a doctor.
She said, well, you're 31 now, and you probably can't stay that thin forever.
The doctor recommends she keep exercising, but Charmian puts on more weight.
So I went to another doctor, and by then I'm a size 6, pushing a size 8. And because I wasn't obese by any means at that size, he didn't seem that concerned to me. He said, well, you're still very thin.
Again, Charmian is told that nothing is wrong with her, and that she should keep exercising if she doesn't want to gain any more weight. In the meantime, her body keeps expanding.
The weight gain was unusual from the aspect that it was mostly in her stomach and upper abdomen. Her arms and legs remained pretty thin.
By the time Charmian returns to her doctor's office 2 months later, she's gained a grand total of 50 pounds.
And he would tell me that's not physically possible to gain that kind of fat, and that I was probably retaining a lot of fluids.
Determined to get back to her former self, Charmian cuts down her calories and ramps up her activity.
So Charmian and I shared a trainer for a while. He had her doing everything from cardio to weights, and he managed her diet.
I remember making a diary of what I was eating, and even for breakfast, I was trying to eat like just a breast of chicken and broccoli. And then for lunch, I would have a salad with no dressing. And then for dinner, if I even ate dinner, I would go back to just a small piece of chicken and only broccoli with nothing on it. And I did this for 2 months, and I gained about 9 pounds.
Charmian Mcgraw has been a size 2 all of her life, but in the last 2 months, she's gained over 50 pounds. She is starving herself and exercising like mad, and nothing helps. One doctor even doubts that Charmian is dieting at all.
I told the doctor that I was eating only broccoli and chicken, and he said, well, I bet if we locked you in a closet and only gave you water, that you would lose weight.
Being with her for sometimes maybe 18 hours in one day, I found it very hard to believe that she could be in some closet somewhere binging on something.
After 1 year, I had gained 100 pounds, and I was up to about 220 pounds. My stomach at night I would measure, and it would be out as much as 54 inches. I even had a girlfriend give me a couple of her maternity clothes, and I would remember cutting the tag out because it's very humiliating to have to be in maternity clothes when you had been a size 2.
But weight gain isn't the only troubling symptom that Charmian has been experiencing.
My nights were horrible, and I could fall asleep fairly quickly, but I would wake up within 10 to 15 minutes with an exorbitant shock to my body where I would jump out of bed because the anxiety would have shot so high. My body was going at like 100 miles an hour on the inside.
Charmian goes to see her doctor about these bizarre episodes.
So she started me on an antidepressant. When I would question her and say, you know, I just want to know why this is happening, she didn't really have many answers, but insisted that we stay on track with the medication.
Soon, Charmian notices stranger things about her body.
Another thing that started happening by this point was I had a hump of fat starting on the back of my neck, and it was quite noticeable.
She is also beginning to change in other disturbing ways.
She had this beautiful long hair, and it started to fall out.
At this point, a rash started over my chest and face.
She had this beautiful radiant skin, and her skin tone had changed dramatically.
My skin was starting to become extremely oily. It would drip from like my nose or from my forehead. It would literally run down the back of my throat. It would be inside my mouth. It was in my eyes. I couldn't wear my contact lenses anymore.
Then Charmian's digestive system starts to act up.
I started having irritated bowel syndrome, where anything I ate just would go right through me.
If she ate something, it wouldn't be 5 minutes that she wasn't running to the restroom with diarrhea-type symptoms.
Alarmed, Charmian makes an appointment with a gastroenterologist.
As I was talking, this doctor was writing out a prescription, and I said, what is this? And he said, it's to help the food go through your stomach faster. I said, did you not hear me? I mean, are you trying to kill me? I said, I'm telling you, I go to the bathroom sometimes 6 times a day. And he said, well, you obviously aren't going that much, or you wouldn't keep gaining weight.
Determined to get to the bottom of her many problems, Charmian continues to see one specialist after another.
I saw a cardiologist, I saw a respiratory therapist, I saw several different internists, 3 or 4 endocrinologists, a nutritionist, a homeopathic MD, I saw a dermatologist.
And as time wears on, Charmian's physical state begins to take a toll on her social life.
Many friends kind of fell by the wayside. When someone has a red rash all over their face, their stomach sticking out 54 inches, and their hair is very thin and oily, they didn't feel it was the appearance that they wanted with them.
I think Charmian felt very lonely.
Like every birthday would happen, and I'd go, by this time next year, I'm gonna be well. Someone's gonna figure out what's wrong with me. And then Christmas would come by, and I would think, by next Christmas, someone is gonna know what's wrong with me. And then that Christmas would come and go, and they didn't know. I thought, this is no way to live. I decided, you know what? This may kill me, but I will not let my obituary read, obese woman dies of unknown causes. And that's when I really started fighting, because I knew I didn't have any other choice.
Charmian Mcgraw had been a size 2 all her life. Then, practically overnight, she balloons to 300 pounds. For 7 years, doctors accused Charmian of overeating. but Charmian knows something is seriously wrong with her. She decides to take matters into her own hands and go through all of her medical records herself.
A lot of them were basic lab work and notes, and mostly everything revolved around she's gained weight. And so one thing, though, that I noticed on just a few pieces of lab work was a hormone, cortisol.
Cortisol is a hormone secreted by the adrenal glands. It is essential to the cardiovascular system and the metabolism. But exposure to high levels of cortisol over a long period of time can be life-threatening.
25 to 108 would be normal. Mine was 190.
Charmian believes she's finally onto something. She researches elevated cortisol on the internet and stumbles across the name of a condition that seems to match.
And when I started reading the symptoms, I knew I had diagnosed myself. It said obesity in the abdomen, rapid weight gain, anxiety, hair loss, everything that I had thought was right there in black and white. I knew I needed an expert.
Charmian immediately makes an appointment at the Center for Endocrinology at UCLA Medical Center.
Going to UCLA, I had a lot of apprehension because I had been for so many years shot down.
Having endured so much doubt and rejection over the past 7 years, Charmian is simply not prepared for what happens when she walks into the endocrinologist's office.
He walked in my room and he shook my hand and he said, "You're here because you have Cushing's?"
It was the diagnosis Charmian had made herself.
And he said, "What took you so long to get here?" And I was shocked that someone, for the first time in 7 years, believed there was something medically wrong with me.
Cushing syndrome is a rare endocrine disorder. Normally, the pituitary gland sends a hormone to the adrenal glands, which triggers them to release cortisol. When everything is running smoothly, the adrenals are instructed to release the exact amount of cortisol that we need each day. But if the pituitary gland isn't working right, the message can get garbled, and the adrenals can release too much cortisol, leading to weight gain, skin breakdown, muscle weakness, and high blood pressure. If a doctor knows what to look for, the symptoms of elevated cortisol are obvious.
The predominance of the weight gain was in her abdomen, and in addition, there was deposition of fat around the back part of her neck, and this is sometimes referred to as a buffalo hump. She had rounding of the face. This is also called a moon face and has a reddish coloration to it.
Someone had opened the prison door, and at least I was with doctors that knew I had not done this to myself.
Tests show that Charmian has a tumor in her pituitary gland, and it's the tumor that's been causing the pituitary to malfunction and send the wrong message to the adrenals. Her only chance for a cure is surgery.
What I typically tell patients is that the risk of something catastrophic going wrong is very low. Other risks are somewhat higher. The risk of a spinal fluid leak is on the order of 2%, and risk to pituitary function, that is, could the patient lose pituitary function from the operation itself, is on the order of around 5%.
In April 2000, almost 8 years since the onset of her symptoms, Charmian heads in for the surgery that she hopes will make her well again. Despite the risks, she can't contain her excitement.
I picked her up at our friend's house the morning of the surgery, and she was so enthusiastic, very excited. You wouldn't think that she was having this major surgery.
The procedure is done under general anesthesia. It's done with an operating microscope. There's no incisions on the face typically. It's done through a nostril. Once we have removed the bone that overlies the pituitary gland and opened the covering, we incise the gland just to the left of the midline. And the soft, typical appearing tumor was quite evident at that point. We were able to remove the tumor completely and to leave the normal gland intact so that we don't cause new pituitary failure from the operation itself. What we like to see after surgery for a patient with Cushing's disease is a precipitous drop in their blood cortisol.
Just hours after the surgery, Charmian's cortisol levels have dropped dramatically.
In the hospital, I lost 4 pounds right away. My hair was so thick again, and the rash left weeks after after my surgery.
Many of the physical changes that happened to her, like the buffalo hump and the moon facies, dissipated over 3 to 4 months, and she just generally felt stronger.
But Charmian is lucky she ever got a diagnosis.
Cushing's disease only affects about 1 to 2 people per million per year in this country.
Cushing's is so rare that some doctors will never see a case in their lifetime and can easily miss its symptoms.
I think that we have to give our patients the benefit of the doubt. If our patient is telling us that I'm working hard, doing everything that I should be, eating well, and I'm still not losing the weight, well, at least it merits an investigation.
Charmian now runs the UCLA Pituitary Patient Support Group and gives talks about her experience at the School of Medicine.
Doctors work side by side, they don't work together. And a lot of patients go from one doctor to another like I did, and I think that really hurts some patients in getting a correct diagnosis.
And finally, Charmian has her life back.
Charmian's prognosis at this point is really quite good. She's now been in remission for over 5 years.
Charmian's doing great. I mean, she is so outgoing. I don't know how she has all the energy that she has.
Now I have no anxiety. I'm back to doing my yoga. I can meditate peacefully. I did ultimately lose over 40 pounds. I feel that, I'm a little overweight now. I don't care now. I look at my body and love it because I'm healthy. And I know I'm going to live my life.
Charmian had difficulty getting treatment even though she knew something was terribly wrong. But what if you receive first-rate treatment for the wrong disease? In 1995, Harley Howard is a healthy 40-year-old family man and a preacher, busy with his own nightly radio show. But one night on the freeway driving back from the radio station, Harley has a scare.
About 5 miles from the house, my heart just started beating quite rapidly, and then it started going irregular and fast.
I had laid back the seat in the car, getting a little nap on the way home, and Harley says, "My heart is acting funny." And he began to rub his chest, so immediately I was wide awake.
They drive straight to the ER, where doctors immediately start an EKG on Harley.
And they found out that the heart rate was between 150 and 160 beats per minute, and it was erratic. It was just beating crazy.
Harley's blood pressure is also high. He's admitted to the hospital, and over the next 3 days, doctors put him through a battery of tests.
Blood tests, urinalysis, EKGs. They were trying so desperately to get the heart rate down, and that would take days.
Doctors decide to try a medication that opens the blood vessels, increasing blood flow to the heart. After a few days, it seems to work. Harley's heart calms down, and he is discharged from the hospital.
Harley, because of heart conditions already in his family, he just thought this may be something that's hereditary. He pretty much took it in stride.
Around the same time, DeWanda notices something strange.
His snoring was increasing. He would snore very loudly, and it was sometimes, and just
Every now and then I might wake myself up in a snore. But the funny thing is she snores as loud as I do.
Neither of them think of snoring as anything serious, so they don't worry. But as time goes on, Harley begins to notice other changes. He starts having nightmares.
I would always wake up, and there was this terror, sweats, fear, just scared.
Harley's terrifying dreams come almost every night.
They were always nightmares concerning death. I would always die in them. After having a nightmare and my heart was just racing, I would just get up because I was afraid to go back to sleep.
When Harley tells his doctors about the nightmares, they don't seem concerned.
They just said, keep taking your medication and keep coming back.
But soon the normally energetic preacher is overcome with exhaustion.
He would consistently want to take naps between services, and he would shut the door of his office, sometimes even put a sign up warning people not to disturb him.
when I would go in to wake him up from an hour's nap, he's still feeling tired, drained even, so he would lay there another hour.
Harley is also developing extremely painful and debilitating headaches.
He would have migraines all the time, and sometimes they would last for days.
My head could not rest on anything. I'd have a pillow around the neck to keep my head from touching the back of a chair.
He would take over-the-counter medicines for it, but they did nothing.
In 1999, 4 years after the first incident, Harley has another scare.
Woke up, another nightmare, another headache, massive headache, heart just racing.
His heart was beating so fast, it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest.
Dee rushes Harley to the ER. Just like the last time, his heart rate is dangerously high. Doctors quickly administer nitroglycerin, a common treatment for chest pain and heart failure.
All my muscular functions were just gone. I'm just flailing. And I felt my heart rate just dip.
Harley's heart rate comes under control again, but doctors need to figure out what is causing these problems in the first place. They perform an ultrasound. The results take Harley completely by surprise.
And she said, quoting, "You have no heart abnormalities." And when she said that, I went like, what am I doing here then? If there's nothing wrong with the heart, then what's been happening all these years? My whole world just crashed.
Harley Howard has spent the last 5 years on heart medication for a problem no one can diagnose. Doctors tell him they can't find anything that might be causing his heart to race out of control. He stays on the medication he's been given, but his heart continues to act strangely.
It would beat a little rapidly, then it would stop, or would skip beats.
Then, in 2000, Harley has his worst heart incident yet.
It was a typical day, headache, got through the day best I could. Another nightmare, got up, heart rate just going crazy. Just going crazy.
It is Harley's third trip to the ER in 5 years, all because of his heart.
Even though we had been in the emergency room several times, I never worried that I was going to lose my husband, but this time it was different.
Doctors have to shock Harley's heart back to its normal rate.
And so they put a pad here and a pad on the side.
The electricity courses through Harley's heart. After a few tense minutes, his heart rate normalizes. But Harley is shaken. This was too close a call.
And they waited a few hours and sent me home. Continue to take the medication you've been taking all along.
But Harley and DeWanda have been down this road before.
And he said, you know, this could be it.
And I told my wife, I am just resolved to die because there's nothing I can do. So I made sure insurances were all paid up, the policies were available where they could be.
My worst fear was that I would be a widow at a young age.
But then Alex Harris, a member of Harley's church who also happens to work at a sleep clinic, thinks he might be able to help.
I noticed signs that he was tired during the daytime. He was having more of these heart issues and his blood pressure was elevating. And then I felt really compelled to strongly urge that he come in for an all-night sleep test.
And I said, a what? I just dismissed the whole thing as nonsense. This man is crazy. What are you talking about?
And I chimed in and said, you know, Pastor, it wouldn't hurt, you know, for you just to go down there.
And I said, fine, all right, I'll get tested. But my intention was to go there to prove him wrong.
On New Year's Eve 2000, Harley drives to the St. John's Medical Plaza Sleep Disorders Center in Santa Monica.
But he looked really bad. He looked really heavy and he looked fatigued.
Alex Harris prepares Harley for the all-night sleep test.
We started by putting electrodes on his scalp to measure brain activity. Put electrodes to measure eye movements. We measured chin, muscle activity, EKG.
Wires everywhere. I went to bed just looking like a robot.
For the first 75 minutes that Harley is asleep, everything is normal.
All he did was snore. And I thought it was a negative test. I thought he was right all this time. He didn't need the test.
But when Harley goes into REM sleep, the dream stage of sleep, everything goes haywire.
snoring stopped and the breathing stopped, and he just had a flat line on his breathing channel. And his oxygen dipped as a result, and I said, aha, he does have sleep apnea.
Obstructive sleep apnea is an often overlooked and very dangerous condition that affects as many as 20 million Americans. It occurs when tissues in the upper airway collapse at intervals during sleep. When these tissues collapse, they block the passage of air, and the sleeper can't breathe. The oxygen levels in the blood drop, and the brain sends a distress signal to the heart and lungs to kickstart respiration. In some sufferers, this process can happen hundreds of times a night. Alex attaches Harley to a continuous positive airway pressure machine, or CPAP.
It is a device that's essentially a blower that blows air into the upper airway via a hose and a mask, and that air would then splint the upper airway open to prevent airway obstruction.
For the first time in years, Harley sleeps through the night.
Wow, I had all this energy. And I said, so let's see the chart. Let's see what's going on.
Before Harley was put on the CPAP machine, his breathing was stopping from 30 seconds to almost a minute. At times, his oxygen levels dropped almost 20%. Once the CPAP was on, it was a completely different story.
My oxygen levels were straight as an arrow. No stress on the heart, perfect heart rhythm. The first words out of my mouth was, hook me up. Hook me up now.
Harley gets his own CPAP machine, and right away he can see a difference.
There wasn't the snoring anymore. He didn't have the headaches like he used to have. It was like the previous years had just been changed in a day.
Heart was fine. Blood pressure dropped. It dropped 30 points in a month. My doctor was shocked.
Thanks to the sleep study, Harley now knows that all his different symptoms had a common cause.
To have a 20% dip in oxygen saturation is very significant. That's going to cause headaches, that's going to cause nightmares, that's going to cause memory loss. It's going to have significant cardiovascular consequences.
Had Harley not been diagnosed, the compounding effects of all his symptoms could have been devastating.
He would have continued to gain weight, retain fluid, have cardiac events of varying types of arrhythmias and palpitations. But I have every reason to think that the course that he was going on would have just accelerated.
Harley was lucky. Sleep apnea is sometimes called a silent killer. Because of its very nature, the fact that it happens during sleep, sufferers have no idea they have a problem. Then the symptoms are treated individually, instead of as indicators of a more serious condition.
If my husband had died during this period of time, I just would have concluded that it was the heart condition that caused his death. I had nothing else to go on before the diagnosis of sleep apnea.